Kia ora koutou katoa and good evening one and all. It's my real pleasure to be here with you for this event tonight. If I could acknowledge Louisa for your welcome and opening to this gathering, and Shailesh and team as well. I spent a number of years as a Cabinet Minister in the last Labour government, and one thing that I can tell you is that on a weekly basis, every Cabinet Minister in the country, from whatever government it is, will have people in their office advocating for policy and lobbying for the outcomes that they think are best. And the vast majority of those people come from the big end of town, from the big business sector, from corporate New Zealand. Now there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes those people have good ideas and you need to listen to them. But I think that if we want to have a balanced approach to the business sector, we need a strong voice coming through from small business as well. As all of you know, who are people who are involved in small business, this is a sector that involves hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who put their blood, sweat and tears into their small businesses. You employ large numbers of New Zealanders, you generate significant economic activity, you're a part of the social fabric of our country. And I've long held the view that the SME sector needs a much stronger and much more unified voice as we go forward. So I'm very pleased to see this initiative moving ahead, and I have a few words to say at the end about where I think you might be able to go with this initiative. Now, I will say when Shailesh invited me to speak tonight, there were two things which sent a shudder up my spine. The first was the venue, the Jet Park, because for anyone who was a minister in the last Labour government during COVID, anytime you heard anything about the Jet Park, it was because something had gone wrong with managed isolation, some kind of disaster about to unfold. So it's nice to be here for a pleasant, positive event, hopefully with no one spreading COVID. The second thing is the topic that Shailesh asked me to speak about, which is the economic environment for small business. And I thought, okay, how do I do that in April 2026 without people wanting to jump out the window at the back of the room? Because as all of you know, the economic environment out there in New Zealand and around the world is enormously complicated and difficult. But you're all also business people. You're realists. You know that you have to accept the realities of what is out there, deal with it, and then make the best of it. So in my comments tonight, about the first half is not going to be optimistic listening. It's going to be an assessment of some of the things that we're seeing and some of the things that I'm hearing out there. But it's the reality that we're dealing with. And then I do want to finish with a few comments about where I think we can go and some ideas for how we can improve the public policy and economic environment for SMEs and how this group can play a part in that. So, without further ado, if we found a clicker or if someone's just clicking the laptop, but if we could flip to the next slide. I put up this quote to kick things off, and it's from a woman called Jessica Ling, who's one of the vice presidents at American Express. And it just stood out for me as something that I believe about small business. She said, small business keeps our communities vibrant. They are the lifeblood of our communities that helps create jobs, boost the economy, and enrich our neighbourhoods. And there's a really important point that I want to draw out of this. Often when small business gets talked about, quite understandably, it's about the economic contribution, and that is important. But actually one of the things I very, very strongly believe is that a big part of the value of small business goes beyond just the economic contribution. You actually help to keep local communities going. You employ local people. When I go down to my local shops at Roskell South, that's where people meet each other. It's where they make friends. It's where you have conversations. It's where, for example, during COVID, I'm phobic about injections, but I know my local chemist down at the Roskell South shop, so he took me off to a private area and was able to help me to get my 3 COVID shots that I have to have. It was otherwise very difficult for me. I like the fact that I can get different types of sausages down at my local butcher shop at the Roskell South shop that isn't the same as at every New World or Woolworths up and down the country. Small business adds something to our local communities and our social fabric. And I think that as we think about small business and its contribution, this sector needs to get much better about talking about that broad social and community impact that you have, as well as the economic impact that you have in our communities. And I thought that comment from Jessica Ling summed that up really, really nicely. Actually, there was me meeting with some folks from the Blockhouse Bay Business Association recently. Now, from that positive note, here are a few slides about the economic environment for small business. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because most of you are living and breathing this. You know that times are very difficult, that we came into 2026 with an extremely sluggish economy heading into negative growth, with serious cost of living pressures. And what that means, of course, is that there are cost pressures on you as small business people, but probably bigger than that, your customers are feeling the pressure, the businesses that you deal with are feeling the pressure, and they're not spending as much. So when you go around and talk to small business people, it's very tough out there at the moment. People often say actually tougher than it was during COVID, actually tougher than it was during the GFC. So we came into 2026 with those challenges: inflation, rising costs, a very slow economy, rising unemployment, which takes demand out of our local communities. People spend less because they're worried. One of the lead economic indicators, we talked to Craig Benny, who's one of our Labour candidates this year. He says, we've got all these economic indicators out there. He reckons about the best one is there's a question which gets asked in the economic surveys: is now a good time to buy a fridge? And it's when households are feeling confident and comfortable enough to spend $500, $1,000 on a spending decision. That tells you the economy's okay. If people are not feeling like it's a good time to buy a fridge now, that tells you something much broader about how households are feeling. And right now, people don't want to buy fridges. So we came in with all of that weakness in our economy, affecting small businesses, and then we've had the whammy of this enormously unstable international situation. These bizarre and irrational actions from the United States and Donald Trump, which have resulted in the Straits of Hormuz being closed, first by Iran, and now, of course, as of today, by the United States themselves, massively spiking oil prices and all of the flow-on effects from that. So it just creates more uncertainty. You'll be seeing that, you'll be feeling that, you'll be dealing with that at the moment. So I don't want to belabor this point because you know it, but it is just important to be aware that those challenges are very real at the moment. And this sector needs to think collectively, and government needs to think with all of the levers that it has about how we provide the support for businesses to be able to survive and get through this period to a point where they can thrive again. Again, not belabouring the point too much here, but the main point I want to make about the challenge that we're facing with high oil prices is what it reminds us of is that we're all part of an economic ecosystem. That a decision that's been made in Washington, which is playing out in the middle of the Persian Gulf, is affecting your small business in the middle of Northcote right now. Okay? Small business doesn't operate in a bubble. You're affected by the decisions that governments make. You're affected by international events that are beyond anyone's control. And those high fuel costs are obviously having a huge impact. You're paying them yourselves. All of your suppliers are paying them. That's feeding into the costs which impact your business. And then again, on the other side of it, your customers are feeling that pain, and that's causing wallets to close up at the moment as well, because people are feeling the pressure of politicians and public policy leaders who are reflecting the things that are going to help your sector. It is important to say on this stuff that government can't just click its fingers. No matter who's in government, whether it's my side, the Labour Party side, or the current government, there's not a simple button that anyone can press to deal with these international pressures that are affecting all of us. There is going to be some real challenge and pain for everyone, as there was during that COVID period. It's no one's fault, it's a reality that we have to deal with. But there are still choices that we can make, and there are still things that governments can do to absorb some of that shock and to help households and businesses get through by providing confidence, and particularly when it comes to small business, by supporting cash flow. You all know that cash flow is king. If you don't have cash flow, that's when businesses go south. So one of the things we did during COVID, through the small business loan scheme, through the wage subsidy scheme, was to make sure that that cash flow was continuing to wash through the system, even while you weren't often able to operate. So just up here are some of the examples of some things that governments around the world have been doing to be supporting small businesses and households in this period. Things like fuel subsidies, reductions to fuel excise duty, those are in Australia, accessing strategic oil reserves and releasing those, additional investment in renewable energy to make sure that the next time a crisis like this happens, we're not so vulnerable. Direct financial aid, we've got a little bit of that happening in New Zealand at the moment. Some households are getting $50 a week, but many are not getting much. That's often been rolled out on a much bigger scale in other countries, just to get that cash flow washing through communities and into the business sector. Many countries are looking at direct support for households with their energy bills, and in some places providing direct support for utility costs for small businesses. It is my view that if this crisis gets worse, and the signs from today are that it could do, that we are probably going to need to do more as a country if we want to help households get through and if we want to help as many small businesses survive as possible. If we continue to have a hands-off approach from government, we will see more small businesses struggling, more unemployment, more economic pain than we need. This is a time for government to step up. And here, unfortunately, is probably one of the most depressing graphs I'll show, and I promise I'll move on to some positive stuff very shortly. Business liquidations at the moment are at a post-GFC high. So actually, business liquidations in 2025 were about twice the rate as they were at the very peak of COVID. So it's quite a sobering thought. And this is pre the oil shock that we're dealing with at the moment. This is pretty much 2025 figures that we are dealing with. A number of things sitting behind that. The biggest one has simply been a couple of years of an economy where demand has been extremely poor. And you would have all been feeling this and observing this. People just haven't had the business coming through. Probably apart from the agricultural sector where international prices are holding things up. So some real challenges there. And as I say, this is before the oil shock. So just laying that groundwork that it is a tough environment that we're in at the moment. And it's another reason why the sector does need a strong voice to be advocating for the support that you need to get through to the other side of some of these challenges. One final thing I do want to comment on just after this one on the next slide, and this does relate to government public policy. One of the things that has concerned me over the last couple of years has been the approach that IRD has been taking to small businesses who get into a challenging space in respect of their tax obligations. In the time that I was MP, it'd be fair to say I formed a range of views about different government departments and how responsive they were. I had a very positive view of IRD. I often found with IRD that when I had a constituent with a small business who had a tax issue, if they came through, if they were relatively open and straight in their dealings, IRD would be extremely facilitative and supportive to help that business get through so they could survive. And that was a rational approach from IRD. It wasn't just being a soft touch. It was a recognition that if that business survived, then over the next 5 or 10 years, they'd be paying more tax. Right? Kind of makes sense to have a long-term view of this stuff. That has changed in the last 2 years. It's very directly changed. IRD is on record on this. The Minister of Revenue is on record of this. That they have basically been instructed to take a much harder line in terms of the way that they engage with small businesses, the way that they seek arrears, and the direct action that they will take. And this, in my view, is one of the reasons that you've seen that spike in liquidations happen as well. There simply hasn't been the same level of support and facilitation from IRD, for example, that we had during COVID, which helped businesses to get through. And it is something that I think needs to change. And I think it's something that the sector could be putting its voice into so that we have a more supportive approach from one of the most important government agencies for small business.
We have time for 2 questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Michael, you do acknowledge the current economic situation. How does the state dependency help in?
You want to mic?
I think I'm not enough.
Yeah, you can just start it. Just be loud.
Yeah.
So, how do you think the state dependency can help in this situation?
Yeah.
Irrespective of whichever government it is.
Yeah. I don't think state dependency will help. But I think that when you are in a period of some economic crisis, if you just let that crisis wash across your economy, you will see good businesses wiped out. And actually, if government takes the support to take some of the edges off, to provide a little bit of support and pathway for businesses to get through. I don't call that state dependency, I call that government doing its job in the public interest. And again, that is what happened during COVID. If we go back to that graph, we actually had a relatively small number of business failures during that period because there was support through a crisis period. Those businesses that survived, they're not now dependent on the government. They just had a little bit of a hand up to get through a situation that's not of their making. We're not talking about rescuing businesses that are unsustainable because they're being run badly. We're talking about businesses who are suffering because of international events that they have contributed nothing towards. And I think there is my view, Labour Party's view, is that there is a positive and a constructive role for government to play there in terms of providing some pragmatic support. I jump to the last slide. I just want to briefly talk through a few thoughts about some things I think we can do during this period. These are things that I think potentially you can feed into. I think it's important for small business to have greater status in the machinery of government. I think there should be someone senior in Cabinet who's got the small business portfolio. When I was a Minister of Immigration, every time I made an immigration decision, I had the Minister of Small Business, who at that time was Stuart Nash, in my ear about what small business needed. That you need someone at the Cabinet table with that role. I was a little bit surprised that the recent announcement of the Minister of Small Business has gone to the most junior member of the ministerial team, Cameron Drew. He's a good guy, but I think you need a heavyweight at the Cabinet table if you want to have that strong voice in there. We need to have a recognition of that broader social and community impact of small business, as I talked about before. We need to shift IR back to a facilitative and supportive approach. We need to invest in main streets and support local initiatives that have tangible outcomes for small businesses. I've really been impressed by the work that is done by many bids around Auckland to support small businesses in those communities and encouraging people to buy local. I think there's more in that space that central and local government could be investing in. We need to implement tax policy that encourages investment into productive businesses. There have been some positive moves on the depreciation front there over the last few years over both governments. And the CGT policy that Labour has announced is partly about that. It's about saying we'd rather that a person with additional capital put that into a small business that employs people and generates growth than into buying and selling new properties. We need to take seriously the current cost of living crisis, and one of the things we need to make sure of is that households are feeling comfortable enough that they're supporting small businesses in their communities, and I think that's going to require some support. Final thing I'll say here is we need to stop the stop-start approach to infrastructure. Small businesses all the time tell me about this, that every time a big infrastructure project is stopped, it flows down to 100 small businesses that were reliant on that work, wanting to engage in it. So we need to develop a level of consensus across our infrastructure pipeline to support this wide voice for small business. It is needed right now more than it has ever been needed. The challenges that the sector is facing are real. We can't necessarily change the international environment, but with a strong voice, with progressive policies that support small business, we can create an environment here which helps you to grow, thrive, and support all of our communities. So please do the work, please support Shailesh and the team, and make yourselves heard. Final thing I will say is my job is to introduce the next speaker. I will just apologise in advance, and I have to leave very shortly on a pre-existing meeting that I am committed to, so it's not because I don't want to hear Dr. Jens Muller. I will say that when I was a Minister of Immigration, Jens was one of the people whose advice I appreciated the most. He has experience of creating a collective voice for licensed immigration advisors, and he was one of the people as Minister who I would sit down with, and he would give me good advice from the grassroots that influence policy. And if you can take some lessons from him, I think you'll be able to be a very effective group. So please welcome him. That there needs to be sustained support for that network. It's really important. You know, if you're a small business and you're a sole trader, maybe there's 2 or 3 people in your business. You know, you don't necessarily have an accountant on hand. You don't necessarily have a strategic advisor on hand. But by being part of that network, you have access to the kind of support and mentoring that can help you get through bumps in the road and go to the next level. So, look, I take that on board. I can't give Labour Party policy commitments tonight, but I agree with what you say, fundamentally. And that'll be something that all parties, I think, nearer to the election need to answer. And again, I've just come back to this point. For you guys to have a strong, collective, unified voice, to put that question and that issue to all of the parties so that you get commitments out of us, it does make a difference when you have a group like this that raises these things.
That's awesome. Great question. Has anybody else got a question for Michael? He's only here for a couple of minutes. This is your opportunity. I can bring the mic to you as well. Don't be shy.
So
If you're
Moses
thinking
has
of
got a question.
Oh yeah? You got a question? Yeah, I'll bring it.
Thank you so much, first. And your short time and you wanted to go, I understand. A lot of questions are there. I will make it one very simple question. I want to see what is the policy that going to be drive, that what contribution that SMEs are making. When they start the business, it's not about their profits, it's not about their losses. Immediately they start contributing by spending a lot of money on meetings, cafes, and making everyone heard. And right? I want to see what is the policy that's going to happen that we can create. That similar way, ongoing support can be passed on to SMEs, even when they see it materializes or not materializes, but that support is needed for sustained and resilient. What's your view on that policy? Are you
Thanks, Shanice. Look, I won't actually presume to say what I think that should be. I think the point is right, that there's a period at the start of formation of small businesses